Good day. Welcome to the Trendy Places, the Trend Podcast with Justin A. William. And I'm here with Ken W. Good, and we are going to talk about bail reform. So, Ken, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me.
Great to talk to you. Great to talk to you. So, can you at first just introduce yourself and then what you focus on with bail reform?
Sure. Again, my name is Ken Good. I am an attorney in Texas. I've been practicing law for 35 years around, and I feel old just even saying it. But hey, that's the reality. I specialize in bail law now, so I represent a bondsman across the state of Texas and surety companies as well on licensing when they have issues. But probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was asked to attend a federal hearing on one of the first cases for trying to mandate bail reform through litigation, lawfare. And I went to the hearing and I became very concerned. I thought the judge was making wrong decisions. And so that case was called O'Donnell versus Harris County. It was probably one of the very first cases, and it has changed the law in many areas, and the judge turned out to be wrong. The judge has been now reversed 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and ultimately the Fifth Circuit ruled that case should have never been even filed in federal court. And so all those other cases that were influenced by O'Donnell, were all influenced by a case that should have never been filed in federal court. So I've written a lot of articles on the issues of bail reform, bad bail reform, what does good bail reform look like, and I've set out to become knowledgeable in these issues because I think the problem we have is when we're not telling the story about these wrong decisions, these legal decisions that are running amok, nobody's telling them.
Yeah, I found that to be the case. I mean, I don't think legal decisions usually on a local level are riveting news for CNN, or even if you want to look at Fox News and MSNBC. But I think
even the plaintiffs themselves, there was an article in Dallas Morning News when they lost a case, and the trial attorneys were saying, well, every trial court that has ever looked at this issue has ruled in our favor and found bail unconstitutional. I mean, I had to send a letter to the editor of the paper, and it was published, pointing out that every case that has been appealed has been reversed. And so they're leaving out important information when they're making this bold allegation, which is actually false. They keep getting reversed.
Do you think there's some kind of agenda behind why they would put it up there if it gets reversed so easily?
Absolutely. I do think there's an agenda. This is an advocacy group that's made of attorneys. They go out and seek contributions to fund what they're doing, and they keep making the same arguments even when they lose. So they're going out and getting millions of dollars in contributions to fund these efforts, and they're just creating havoc across the country. I mean, somebody needs to start sanctioning them if they keep raising the same issues that's now been reversed so many times.
So you find that it's kind of like this, almost like a Ponzi scheme, right? I mean, it's like you want to raise money for yourself or whatever your interests are. You know that it's fraudulent, but you do it anyway.
Well, and you have to show success. So, they keep winning at the trial court. They keep getting reversed at the Court of Appeals, and then they take it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court denies it. But now they've taken 5 or 6 cases to the Supreme Court. Initially, they were juicy legal arguments. The last 2 cases they took to the Supreme Court were procedural issues, which were stupid appeals to begin with. So, yes, they are absolutely, it's a Ponzi scheme. They're using their success to go back to their millionaire donors and raising money, and because they're misrepresenting that they're having success when they're not. They're just causing counties and states to spend a lot of money to defeat them.
I feel like this connects to the contentiousness around this issue. I think a lot of times when people talk about bail reform, they might talk about it as a racial or cultural issue, or they might talk about it as a socioeconomic issue. Do you think that these people that are doing what you're saying are playing into that in a sense?
Not only are they playing into it, I mean, they're the ones that are designing and developing those talking points. I mean, they're so well organized. They're raising all these funds. They have PR groups that are telling them and doing the press releases on all these arguments. So they're focusing, they're doing focus groups on what's the best argument for bail reform. So all these arguments about we've got too many people in jail of certain races, those are all poll tested, PR stunts. I mean, it's not about criminal justice reform. It's not about anything else. It's about just politics at this point.
Yeah, yeah, and that's unfortunate because I think bail reform is a major issue, particularly for people. If you really want to create a standard of um, people interchange the word equity and equality, but if you want to create a equal system, you should have a system that works and that's based off of fairness, but also sense, right? I mean, we don't want what happens in New York is pretty much a travesty. Where
Absolutely, it is.
I don't know if you've heard about.
No.
We had two people who were illegally here beat up a police officer, and then because of our bail reform laws, they were
Yeah.
let out, and then they did something similar again.
Yeah. I mean, you're seeing that across the country where these bad bail reforms for political reasons are being put in place. And the reason why they aren't working is because there's not an alternative to the private surety bail system. I mean, the private surety bail system has by far the lowest failure to appear rate. That means we get people to court the most often, and that means cases can get resolved and people can get justice, and so you can move on to the next case. But when you try these alternatives, they're not really alternatives because they have such a high failure to appear rate. When you have a 50% failure to appear rate or an 80% failure to appear rate, and the case has to be put on hold until they return, well, then you don't have an alternative. You're just creating, doing a new system that's creating chaos. Chaos creates de facto decriminalization, and de facto decriminalization is a green light for criminals to go, hey, I can keep doing this, and crime will go up. And that's what we're seeing everywhere these bad bail reform measures are being put in place.
Yeah, and people who commit crimes tend to be people who will commit a crime again in certain aspects, in certain scenarios. I mean, if you have someone who is completely lawless in their behavior, I mean, for example, the stats to back that up, right? In New York, it was, I think, 70% or 85% of the people who were doing all the crimes were people who were doing them again and again and again. It was the same people committing crimes. And you think to yourself, after one crime or two crimes, they would be incarcerated, but they're not.
Yeah.
They're getting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chances. And I tend to see that the DA is giving chances to people that he set a low standard for, right? I mean, for me, the contentiousness, and one of the reasons why I want to talk to you about this, is I don't like the soft bigotry of low expectations, right? That you have.
Oh, yeah, that's a great way of saying it. The soft bigotry of low expectation. That's a great way to say it because, the way I've heard it explained is, there's always a city within the city, and there's a small group that are the criminals. But between the law-abiding citizens and the criminal city, there's this gray area of people that they're making up their mind every day on whether they're going to be in the criminal city or the law-abiding city. And when you have these bad bail reform measures put in place, they're saying, well, wait, there's no consequences, so I'm going to join the criminal city for a while. And what you're saying is, I love that expression. The low, wait, say that again.
It's the soft bigotry of low expectations.
The soft bigotry of low expectations, because, and the reason why that's such a good statement is because who are they hurting the worst with these soft bigotry of low expectations? The very communities they say they're trying to help, because they're releasing these people back into those communities, and we commit crime in the communities we live in. So it's by and large, it's a black on black crime, a brown on brown crime, a white on white crime by and large. That's why 50% of all murder victims in the United States are young black males. And by and large, the people that are committing those crimes are young black males as well.
Yeah, I mean, people tend to go like for like with their criminality because that's what's convenient. It's the closest in range. People are not going to range out of their neighborhoods, especially when the further you go, the more opportunity there is for maybe a cop to notice you. Or
but then overlay what you're saying, the soft bigotry of low expectations. They know they're going to get away with it more often if they do it in their own community, where it's race, the same race committing the same crime because of the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yeah, and when we say that phrase, right, it's a bigotry that's coming I don't think it's coming from where the mainstream media is saying that it comes from the right all the time. These are people who are Democrats, liberals that have been in power in these cities for 30, 40 years. And they are the ones who are preaching the DEI and diversity and equity
Yes.
argument. But then they're going out and they're treating us like we don't want organized cities. We don't want crimeless cities. Like we don't deserve that, right? I mean, the worst thing I ever
I've
heard.
said that is, with these arguments you're saying that our minority communities are poor minority communities don't deserve public safety. That's what you're saying.
Right. That's what they're saying. Yeah. I remember, my mother, I talked to her a lot, and she has been a Democrat her whole life. But she just wrote a book, and she asked me to write the foreword. And she said, I want you to talk about, because I'm a political scientist by trade, I want you to talk about what happened to my neighborhood. She grew up in St. Albans, New York. And in the 60s, when she was really little, it was a nice neighborhood of military people, doctors, lawyers. You had a full community, and you had the city providing services to that community. All of a sudden, in the late 70s, 80s, that situation changes drastically. And it becomes impoverished, it becomes drug ridden, and there's no cops around, there's no busing. And I told her, I said, look, like, I know that in some ways you don't like the party with the big R, but it's the party with the big D that did that. It was Koch. It was everybody before Giuliani that had removed that neighborhood. And it got me thinking, because in my own politics have shifted, right? I mean, for a long time, I was you could say like an Al Gore Democrat, right? Like I was a classical liberal in my sense. And I thought, when you talk about social justice, I liked a lot of what I was hearing, but I didn't really think about the outcomes and the statistics to go by it. And then when I went to graduate school, and at Rutgers, they were like, it's all about data, right? You want to be right on the side. You want to be on rightness, not on the side of it feels good or it's the easiest convenient thing to say. So I with this bill reform thing, I'd like to hear from you in terms of what you think would be a better solution. And also, how do we get to this point where it's so politicized, where it's so contentious?
I mean, the reason why we got here and why it's so politicized, because probably 4, 5, 6 election cycles ago, an election cycle is every 4 years we have a party running for, we have a presidential election. So about 4 or 5 election cycles ago, we had one party creating, so something would happen and we would start having all these huge protests, and it was always criminal justice related. It was a big travesty. And so they would tell their supporters, you are being mistreated by the criminal justice system and you need to get angry and you need to come out and vote in larger numbers. And it worked for several election cycles. But after the election, it was over. It was just jargon. It was just a political rhetoric. But then they started creating these mobs. And once you create a mob, you lose control of the mob. And so the mob started electing what I would call the true believers, who are going to, we're going to enact policies that are exactly like you've been mistreated. And the problem with the mistreatment argument is, well, what if it's wrong? We've got a lot of data now saying that there's a reason why we have a disproportionate number of certain individuals in the prison system, because we have a disproportionate amount of crime coming from those racial groups. I mean, the Minnesota there's a think tank in Minnesota that reviewed all of the arrest records for a 1 year, and they had traced all the racial makeup of not only the person arrested, but the accuser of the crime. And they found, well, the reason why there was a disproportionate number of certain races in the jails because they had a disproportionate number of crimes being reported. And so when you're enacting these policies that say, well, we've got to change what we're doing because we have a disproportionate number of certain races in the jail, if you're wrong in what your theory is, well, then you are doing great harm to that very racial group in the policies you're enacting. And that's the big fallacy. They're not even looking at that. And that's why I would say we know it's all political, because look at the city or the county Akron in California. I think it's the city of Akron in California. The NAACP in there came out with a press release blasting the local elected officials, demanding a state of emergency on crime. And the DA just attacked them as it was Oakland, attacked them as, hey, you're just using the Republican talking points. They're like, no, crime is crazy and we need it to stop. So the people pushing these policies are not even acknowledging that they're not working. And they're not even willing to admit crime's going up in our urban cities. They're just saying, oh, these are all Republican talking points. Crimes, it's just a perception issue. And that's how you know it's political. Because if it wasn't political, we've tried what they wanted to do. It didn't work, and we would be doing something else. So the fact that we're not proves that it was all political, and it remains political today.
Yeah, I think there are people who, they conflate discrimination with disparities, right? That you have a disparity, right? You have what you define as too much of one race or class in an area, and you don't want that because you think that's a social ill. And maybe it is, it probably is, right? We don't want that. But then they don't want to allow us to teach our families or our kids personal responsibility in any kind of way. I mean, what I'm seeing in the culture from bail reform to voting, right, is this notion that one side is saying, hey, we'll take care of everything for you. And you're always a victim. Don't take responsibility for anything. It's never your fault. It's always the fault of something that happened 300 years ago or happened 50 years ago, right? And what that does to the mindset, because I'm in education, I teach Black and brown kids all the time, and I work with them. And what I find is this notion that a lot of them are waking up and saying, look, like, this is kind of ridiculous to think that it's the fault of something that my grandmother doesn't even remember, right?
Yeah.
In some way, if we want our communities to change, we have to be there to really have the best policymakers who are earnest in wanting to do it. But I think what happens is we vote based off of our hearts, right? We say, no, we want to be compassionate at all times. We said this American value is constantly compassion, but without any responsibility. So when it comes to bail reform, specifically, what I've seen in New York is this sense that Mayor Adams, and I'll call him out by name, Mayor Adams has failed us in a way. He's failed us in a major, major way that I see across the country spreading. But I do think what's interesting is, I think the DA in San Francisco, she was a very big liberal who was talking about eliminating all responsibility for criminality, right? But then it came to her doorstep. It got closer to her doorstep, and she said, okay, we have to totally reverse on that.
Well, but Mayor Adams is kind of an interesting case in New York City because he's really a moderate. And he has stood up. I mean, he's former law enforcement. He's kind of stood up to the far, far left. And he's really been attacked for not jumping on board with these blatantly terrible policies. But he made a really good argument on a podcast because he was responding to some of these hateful arguments they make because it's all racial related and it's all, you just don't, you hate Black people. And it's like, no, I mean, we want public safety, but his point is, one of the foundations of society is public safety. And if you can't provide public safety, then you're not going to have a society for very long. And so you kind of wonder, I mean, you would wonder, is that really what this is all about? Is that they want to kill society? And I don't think that's what it is. I think it's more simple than that. They know, they see all the money that goes to law enforcement and they're trying to lower that. And we're not saving it. We're putting it in social issues, which is what those groups are pushing. So they're trying to lower the budgets of law enforcement to put more money into their social issues because we're sure not saving money. And we're being told we just have to put up with more crime. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, go to California where they passed Proposition 47, which changed a felony of theft under $950 to a misdemeanor. And then in our urban areas, they just said, oh, well, we're not going to prosecute it anymore. And so they have blatant shoplifting of $25,000 a day at stores. And so stores are closing. And now on the ballot in November is Prop 36 to do major reforms to Prop 47 because it's just not sustainable. It can't last. People are running from California.
Yeah. They're losing money, which is the whole purpose of what they're doing. It seems like, I find this, and I'm so glad I was able to talk to you and you've come on and said these things because I'm not normally able to have a conversation like this where I'm from. But I will say that it seems like there's an industry of activism, right? There's an industry of this kind of not-for-profit social justice activism that, like any industry, needs to sustain itself financially. And when just going out and getting donors isn't enough, you got to create problems to create solutions. It's like, I'm a comic book fan. So in the comic books, you might have a villainous group that says, look at Gotham, it's perfect, right? So why don't we flood it with this and this and that? It becomes a problem, and then we're the solution, right?
It is so, let me give you an example of how bad it is. So if you are a progressive DA running in an urban area, you're going to get approached to be supported by a group that's funded by George Soros. And then once you're elected, you're going to be invited to a seminar by another group that's supported by Soros. And when you get there, they're going to say, quid pro quo, these are the things that we're going to expect you to do because you got our support. You're no longer going to seek enhancements on crimes. So when you arrest a drug dealer with 25 pounds of meth, you're only going to charge him with possession of drugs, just like, the user. And so the maximum sentence he's going to face is 2 weeks instead of 20 years. And so, of course, for those people, they're like, that's a cost of doing business. Great. And you're no longer going to seek long sentences. You're no longer going to prosecute certain crimes. And these are the costs. And then they have a whole nother PR group that is going to give you press releases that is going to justify and explain that what you're doing is the proper thing, and that this is going to make it easier for those people and for their families. And then you're going to create another group over here that they're going to join and be a part of that shows they're all coordinating with other people who are doing great things that is actually decreasing crime. And so if crime is going up, it's not because of their actions. It's all coordinated, and it is terrible. And when we've been through this before. We went through it in the 60s. We felt safe. We were more forgiving on our criminal laws. Crime started going up, and we had a backlash. We had one party that refused to work with the other to find a solution, and so we ended up with Reagan and the war on crime. We're going through the same period right now. The Democrats are making this a personality race right now, and they think that that's the way that they're going to win this election and not address the issues, because they can't address the issues because the voters are against them on the issues. So they've decided that they're just not going to talk about them. And so they may get through this election cycle, but the bubble is getting so bad. The backlash is going to be so bad when it eventually hits that it's going to be ugly.
Yeah, there's been a huge shift in terms of voting possibilities for at least young African-American men, and then Hispanics as well, who I think are saying to themselves, we have heard a lot of arguments about how this soft bigotry is really affecting us negatively, and we don't want it anymore, right? I mean, time's up, really. Time is up on The Great Society by LBJ, right? Who was a guy who I don't think would have liked me anyway, or wanted me to marry his daughter based on how he used to refer to African Americans, right? So, and that's unfortunate. I think that in a lot of ways, what we're talking about here is not a right or left issue. It's a human issue. It's
absolutely right. Public safety is not a left issue or a right issue. It is, and there was a time where both parties agreed on public safety. I don't know how we got to this point where one side really doesn't believe in public safety. I do blame it on these activist groups, because a lot of the talking points, the one that says crime's not really increasing, it's just a perception issue, that came from this, advocacy group that's filing all these lawsuits, or were filing these lawsuits nationwide. I mean, they were setting the talking points for the national party on the left, saying it's a perception issue. I'm like, I could trace it all the way back to that group. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is. There was a story that I read about a Harvard professor, African-American guy, who went into a study. He said, once and for all, let's discover, is the law enforcement system racist, right? So he went about surveying cops and people who work in law enforcement, bail informants and all that. And he was shocked to find that you may have a few little blips here and some idiots here, but institutionally, it was not. He couldn't find any data to support that. And his colleagues said this. They said, do not publish that. And then he said, why? This is going to be good. This is going to change perception. It's going to bring us together. And they said, well, why would you want us to bring us together? We don't want to be brought together. We want division, separation. We want equity. We don't want equality.
Well, but
And
isn't that the whole
stunt.
point of making the envy, the anger,
Right.
to bring out people to vote? I mean, that's really what all this is about, I think.
Right. Yeah. I think it's a huge issue. So in our last 3 minutes here, I want to ask you, for our audience, what would you say about somebody who is offended by what we've been talking about, right? That says, no, that because of certain privileges that certain people have, certain people need to be forgiven more than others, right? Certain people need to have more compassion than others. Even if they're doing crimes, it's always society's fault. It's not anybody individually's fault.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a little story in these last 3 minutes. I grew up very poor. I mean, I
Mhm.
had two public school teachers for parents. I mean, I didn't even know until I was in my 30s. My parents got married, dropped out of college, started having
Mhm.
kids, had 4 kids in 2 years and 5 months. Then my
Wow.
dad went back to college because my sisters are twins. And then when we were all in school, my mom went back, finished school, and we were poor public school teachers family. And my dad used to say he had two jobs, one just to pay the milk bill because we were always growing boys and girls. And
Mhm.
so everything that I have being an attorney is because I work my butt off. And I think a lot of this soft bigotry that you're talking about is telling people you don't have to work your butt off. And there's a reason why you shouldn't have to work your butt off because it's not your fault. And
Right.
I believe everything in society that is worth getting is only obtainable when you're poor like me is through hard work. And
Mhm.
when you work hard, there's going to be benefits from that, and there are benefits no matter what your racial makeup is, and you can better yourself. And I think this soft racism, soft bigotry through that we've talked about today, it's really saying nothing's your fault. It's always someone else's, and that's not really our country. What you're really saying is our minority groups don't deserve public safety anymore, and
Yeah.
I completely disagree with that. Public safety demands that we have rules, and if people don't follow them, then there's consequences. Another argument for all this is there should never be any consequences or accountability, and that's destroys our society. We can't have public safety. So, I,
Right.
if you agree with that, then you agree we can't have public safety, and I completely think that's it's not logical, and it's not what we should be working towards in this country. I mean, the whole argument was, hey, we don't have to have the private surety bail system because people want to go to court. COVID completely disproved that. All the data coming to that says no. If you don't make them go to court, they won't go to court. If there's an
Mhm.
80% failure to appear rate in all misdemeanors in California because they have simple release, they don't use the private surety bail system, and a lot of those cases are being dismissed because they don't come back, and the Speedy Trial Act expires. Well, that tells you everything you need to know, but we don't hear about that because we can't talk about it because that disputes the narrative.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ken. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And I got to end it by just saying, for anybody who would use a racial privilege argument, think about it like this. If you were a kindergarten teacher, like my kindergarten teachers, and I was sitting there in the class and I was one of the only African Americans there, they would say, I want to hold you to a high standard because I know your parents want that. And I know that's what's going to make you successful. Everybody can agree on that. My kindergarten teachers, they were Democrats, they were liberals, but they still held me to a high standard. It's not racist to do that because that's what I want, because that's what makes me successful. I hold myself to a high standard because I want to work hard to get what I need to get. I feel weird when someone just gives me something, and I think most people do. This notion that African Americans would rather see a world that has crime in it, but yet it shows that you're being compassionate and equitable, as opposed to a world without crime, but yet maybe we have to work for what we get. That's a false dichotomy. We, just like anybody else, want to be people. And just like what you're saying today, we can stop a lot of what's happening by changing the way that people pay attention to certain things. And that's why I bring this up on the podcast with Ken, because it starts small, right? I mean, people think, oh, it's all about national elections. It's really not. It's really about your regional law enforcement. It's about your regional politicians. If you liked what you heard on this podcast today, definitely go out and get involved and change, because to believe that there isn't an agenda is just it's not a conspiracy theory. It's false, I would say.
Well, and I would add to that, I mean, I've done a lot of podcasts. I have my own podcast called The Bell Post. You can find it at thebellpost.com. But I would say, in my experience, when I'm debating on these issues, when somebody their response to me is "you're racist," that means they don't have a response to the subject matter, to the substance of my argument. So they're going straight to an identity politics argument that says, discount anything Ken says. I don't have to respond to it because we're just saying Ken's a racist, so don't listen to him. If you want to make headway with your arguments, set aside that, go to the substantive argument, and then you can come back and say, and on top of that, I think you're racist. I mean, you're cutting off debate when you go to that argument, and it's a shortcut. And to me, it shows that you lack the ability to respond to the substance of the argument.
Absolutely. Ken, I want to thank you for coming on today. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. And for our audience, remember to like, share, and subscribe. This is going to be on YouTube now, as well as Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, and get them wherever they're found. Ken, thank you so much. And we'll be in touch. I got to have you back on again, man.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.